Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're tackling MicroStrategy, or MSTR as you might know them.
Definitely a company making waves, and specifically waves in the Bitcoin ocean.
Exactly. And the source you sent over.
Let's just say it's got some thoughts on whether this is a good investment or not.
We're looking at a Reddit post. Title is, well, Why MSTR is a piece of shit stock and you're a dumbass for investing in it. A presentation.
Straight to the point, huh?
No subtlety there. And the author even goes as far as comparing their whole approach to, wait for it, a Ponzi scheme.
Bold claim. So where do we even start unpacking this? What's the deal with this intelligent leverage thing everyone keeps talking about?
And why does our Reddit friend hate it so much?
All right, so intelligent leverage is how MicroStrategy describes their Bitcoin buying strategy. They use convertible debt, meaning instead of paying back loans with cash.
They use shares of their own stock.
Right. So as long as Bitcoin's price keeps climbing and people want that MSTR stock, it can seem like a pretty sweet deal. The value of the shares they use to repay the debt rises along with Bitcoin.
More investors, more money for MSTR to buy more Bitcoin, which then could push the stock price even higher. Sounds like a cycle, maybe a little too good to be true.
That's exactly where the Ponzi scheme comparison comes in. Our Reddit author argues that the gains early investors enjoy are basically fueled by later investors putting in their money.
So what happens when the well runs dry?
That's the million-dollar question. The author paints a picture of a house of cards where eventually the music stops and someone's left holding the bag.
Speaking of bags, the post goes into some specific calculations, right? Comparing the value of MSTR shares to Bitcoin over time.
Yep, they break it down pretty meticulously. And what they're showing is that for folks buying in later, as more shares get issued to buy all this Bitcoin, their returns diminish.
So even though MSTR is scooping up more Bitcoin, each individual share represents a smaller and smaller slice of the pie.
Yeah.
Classic dilution, right?
Exactly. And the author's point is, to keep this whole thing afloat, MSTR needs a constant and ever-increasing flow of new money. They even cite MSTR's own reports, where they state they intend to increase their capital raising target by $4 billion, yes, with a B, billion-dollar, each year.
Whoa. Okay, so even our skeptical Reddit friend admits that Bitcoin itself does have value. Couldn't you argue that MSTR is basically just hitching their wagon to a potentially successful asset?
That's definitely a key piece of the puzzle. But the post argues that even if a Bitcoin does keep going up, MSTR's model is inherently risky because of this extreme reliance on attracting new investment.
So for someone who believes in Bitcoin, buying MSTR might not be the most straightforward or even safest way to play that belief.
That's the argument. Investing in MSTR isn't a one-to-one with buying Bitcoin directly. You're getting diluted exposure plus their original software business.
They're actually losing money on that, aren't they?
Big time. The post highlights that MSTR's software business is losing a staggering $340 million every quarter.
Oof, that's not a small number. I did see some pushback in the comments, though. Plenty folks seem to believe in Bitcoin long-term, and they see MSTR as a way to leverage those potential gains. What's their rationale?
A lot of these commenters are basically saying they're shorting the dollar. They believe Bitcoin's going to outperform traditional currencies in the long run, and they're willing to accept the risks associated with MSTR's leverage in hopes of getting bigger returns.
A high-stakes bet on Bitcoin and on the dollar declining. But as we've said, there are definitely some potential pitfalls along that path.
For sure. If Bitcoin either flatlines or drops significantly in value, all that debt MSTR has taken on could become unsustainable. They might have to start selling their Bitcoin to cover those debts, which could then trigger a cascade effect,
leading to potentially a complete collapse.
It's not a scenario anyone wants to see. And there's another interesting point that came up in the comments. Some folks compared MSTR to a Bitcoin call option.
Can you break that down for us?
So a call option basically gives you the right, but not the obligation, to buy an asset at a certain price. It's a way to control your risk while still having the chance to profit if things go your way.
So with MSTR, are they saying it's like betting that Bitcoin will go up? But if it doesn't?
Then your investment could potentially become worthless, just like a call option that expires out of the money. It's high risk, high reward, that's for sure.
It sounds like you need a strong stomach and a lot of faith in Bitcoin to play this game. We've covered a lot about this intelligent leverage, the risks, some counterarguments, but I feel like there's still more to uncover.
Absolutely. There are always more angles to consider, and we'll be doing just that in the next part of our deep dive. Stay tuned. As we dig deeper, it's important to remember that Reddit post, passionate as it is, it's just one perspective, right?
Right. We can't build our whole understanding on one opinionated post, no matter how much research went into it. So what other things should we be thinking about when we look at MSTR as a potential investment?
I think it's crucial to recognize that markets, they don't operate in a vacuum. There are so many factors at play, like overall investor sentiment, big macroeconomic
Even
trends.
just technological advancements, those can throw a wrench in things too.
Exactly. So even if this whole intelligent leverage model has the potential downsides the Reddit post points out, MSTR could still do well if the overall market conditions are favorable.
Makes sense. So it's not quite as black and white as that one post might make it seem. But let's go back to that Bitcoin call option analogy for a second. Do you think that's a fair comparison?
It's definitely a simplified way to look at it, but yeah, it does capture that high risk, high reward element of investing in MSTR. If Bitcoin goes through the roof, MSTR shareholders could be sitting pretty.
But if Bitcoin stumbles,
Those gains could disappear just as fast.
timing the market, getting in early, riding that wave up, and then selling before it potentially crashes, that's a risky game to play.
Some people try to do that, sure, but market timing is notoriously difficult, even for the pros. It's inherently speculative.
Definitely not something I'd recommend for anyone who can't handle a little or a lot of risk. Let's flip this around. What would have to happen for, that Reddit author's prediction to come true? For MSTR to go up in flames, as they put it so
I mean,
delicately.
two things could really contribute to that scenario. First off, a major drop in Bitcoin's price, like a sustained, substantial drop.
And because of all that leverage MSTR is using.
Exactly. Those losses would get amplified, putting huge pressure on their financial health.
And they might be forced to sell their Bitcoin to cover their debts, right? Like we talked about earlier.
It could create a really nasty downward spiral.
A domino effect.
Okay.
So Bitcoin's price tanking, that's one big factor. What else?
Regulatory changes are another big one. Governments are still figuring out how to handle cryptocurrencies. Any sudden shifts in regulations, especially if they're unfavorable, could have a big impact on MSTR.
Definitely adds another layer of risk to the whole equation. What about their software business? Could that play a role in MSTR's future, positive or negative?
Absolutely. The fact that it's currently losing money is a major factor. If that continues, it just puts more strain on their resources, makes them more vulnerable to those external shocks.
So we've got the price of Bitcoin, we've got the regulatory landscape, and we've got the performance of their software business. Sounds like MSTR is standing on a pretty wobbly three-legged stool.
Great analogy. And then there's the whole Michael Saylor factor to consider.
Oh yeah, the CEO. The Reddit post certainly didn't hold back on him. But I've also heard people call him a visionary, a crypto pioneer. How does his personality, his leadership style, fit into all of this?
Saylor's impact is undeniable. He's the one pushing this Bitcoin strategy. Some investors love his confidence. They see it as conviction. Others, well, they see it as potentially reckless.
So investing in MSTR is kind of like placing a bet on Michael Saylor's vision of the future as well.
I think that's a fair way to put it. What are some of your key takeaways so far? Anything you think our listeners should really keep in mind?
Well, for one, investing in MSTR is not for the faint of heart. You got to be comfortable with risk, with the potential for big wins, but also big losses.
In understanding that intelligent leverage model, that's key. It's not just buying Bitcoin, it's using debt to amplify your exposure.
Which, of course, magnifies both the risks and the rewards.
Mm.
And like you said, it's not a pure Bitcoin play either. There's the software business, Saylor's leadership, the whole macroeconomic environment, regulatory uncertainty.
A lot of moving parts to keep track of, and no easy answers.
It really comes down to your own risk tolerance, your investment goals, and what you believe about the future of Bitcoin and, frankly, the entire financial system.
Well said. We've covered a lot of ground, but our deep dive isn't over yet. In the final part, we'll be exploring some more perspectives on MSTR, trying to make sense of all the different opinions swirling around this company.
All right, we're back, diving deeper into the MicroStrategy saga. We've gone through their intelligent leverage, looked at the good, the bad, the potentially ugly. But there's always more to the story, right?
Absolutely. It's easy to get caught up in the strong opinions, especially with that Reddit post as our starting point. So let's zoom out a bit, try to be a little more neutral here. Every investment has its fans and its critics.
That Bitcoin call option comparison keeps coming up. Is that really a fair way to think about MSTR? And if so, what does that mean for people thinking about investing?
It's an interesting analogy, and I think it gets at something important. Like a call option, investing in MSTR gives you leveraged exposure to Bitcoin. So yeah, if Bitcoin's price explodes upward, MSTR shareholders could make a killing. But there's a key difference to remember.
Call options have an expiration date.
Right. And if Bitcoin hasn't hit a certain price by that date, the option's worthless. With MSTR, there's no set expiration, but the principle is similar.
So yeah, big potential profits are tempting, but you could also lose everything you put in.
It's a high-stakes game, no doubt about it. You have to go into it understanding the downsides. MSTR is betting heavily on Bitcoin going up, and if that bet goes wrong...
The consequences could be pretty dire.
Exactly. So if you're not on board with Bitcoin's future, MSTR is probably not for you. But even for those who are bullish on Bitcoin long-term, there's another question.
Is MSTR the best way to get in on the action?
Right. We've talked about this. Buying MSTR isn't the same as buying Bitcoin directly. You're not only exposed to Bitcoin's volatility, but also to all the decisions MSTR's management makes. The debt they're carrying, their software business, it's...
Not exactly thriving. And the Reddit post did bring up some good points about those things. The losses in their software division, whether the CEO strategy is too aggressive.
Those are valid concerns. Any potential investor needs to think about those things carefully. Don't just rely on one source, even if they sound really convincing.
It's like what we always say, right?
Yeah.
Do your own research, think critically.
Absolutely. That Reddit post was a great starting point, but it's just that, a starting point. Dig deeper, look at different perspectives, form your own conclusions. Investing always involves risk, and managing that risk means doing your homework.
As we wrap up this deep dive into MicroStrategy, what are your final thoughts? What should our listeners take away from all of this, especially when it comes to navigating the world of crypto?
I think MSTR is a really interesting case study. It shows both the exciting possibilities and the serious challenges that come with this new financial landscape. Crypto has changed the game, there's more complexity, more risk, and investors have to be prepared for that.
And as we've seen with MSTR, leverage can be a powerful tool, but it can also backfire spectacularly. It amplifies the gains, but also the losses.
Ultimately, deciding whether to invest in MSTR is a personal choice. It depends on your risk tolerance, your goals, what you think about the future of Bitcoin, the global economy, all of that. But no matter what you think about MSTR, I hope this deep dive has shown how important it is to be a critical, discerning investor. Question everything, get different viewpoints, don't just follow the hype.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of MicroStrategy and Bitcoin. It's a wild ride, and we hope you found this conversation helpful as you navigate it.